Now it's time for Lefties Losing It, and we can't go a week on this program without including the lunatic ravings of the ladies of The View. Today it's Ana Navarro's turn, and she was talking about the Super Bowl of all things. But as usual, she was obsessed with two things, Donald Trump and her race delusions. Take it away, Ana.
You know I don't do sports, you know I don't do football, so I wasn't watching the game. But listen. I think today Donald Trump is going to sign an executive order banning black people from halftime.
And what is she basing this delusional fantasy on? She thinks racists were upset by the halftime show when really it was just people with ears. Super Bowl made a feat, you're diabetic, mouth you full of deceit. Maybe an executive order to ban artists most of the audience has never heard of from halftime shows. That may be an idea. But let's get back to Ana Navarro's genius analysis.
We're talking about whether the NFL was capitulating to Trump by removing the term "end racism" from the end zone. Yeah. Boy, did they not capitulate to Trump. When I saw Samuel L. Jackson dressed as a black Uncle Sam, introducing Kendrick Lamar, who then had like an entire formation of all black people making a U.S. flag. Now, let's be honest, Kendrick Lamar's performance was pretty mid, as the kids say.
Burn this thing down, don't you play with me, stay with me. Crashing out right now, it ain't safe for me. Did it with integrity. These boys try to hate on me, just wait and see. More blood be spilling, it's just pain to me.
Yep, it was pretty mediocre, particularly when we are used to the cream of the crop performing at the Super Bowl halftime shows. But Kendrick Lamar actually didn't politicise the 14-minute performance other than to take aim at Drake. There were no anti-Trump, anti-MAGA, anti-America messages. Once Ana and the ladies of The View figure that out, they're going to be pretty miserable. But the NFL did try to politicise the event by running this ridiculous commercial where a young black woman, beats a team of men, a team of Brads.
Let's settle this once and for all. Your best guy?
Girl.
Whatever. Versus our best guy. The Brad.
Oh, not the Brad. I'm Brad.
I can read.
There you go. You got folded up, Brad. Get her. Okay. That's what I'm talking about.
These are the simpletons who pretend to be pro-women, but they throw women under the bus by supporting men identifying as trans women, invading women's sport. And talking about pretending to be pro-women while simultaneously throwing women under the bus, here is Nike, painfully woke Nike, running an ad suggesting the real threat to women's sport is sexism. Reminder, this is the same Nike that used Dylan Mulvaney as an ambassador. But please, tell me how much you support girls and women's sport.
You can't be emotional, so be emotional. You can't take credit. You can't speak up. You can't be so ambitious. You can't break records. You can't have any fun. You can't make demands. You can't keep score. You can't stand out. Whatever you do, you can't win.
Now let's hear from this totally rational woman, probably a fan of The View, who blames President Donald Trump for her team losing yesterday.
The reason why we didn't win because Trump was at the goddamn game. God damn it! Trump should not have been at our game.
And we'll have plenty more Lefties Losing It content with my next guest, Sky News contributor Kosha Gator. Kosha, we will get to that phone call between Donald Trump and Anthony Albanese shortly, but let's start with the USAID scandal. If you want to know why the left is so committed to this cause, it's not that they care about feeding the impoverished or giving medicines to the sick. those programs will continue, it's because they found a way to use taxpayers' money to push their insane far-left agenda. Here is Trump advisor Stephen Miller explaining it.
The USAID was a slush fund, first of all, for left-wing projects around the globe, like gender surgeries around the world, diversity, equity, and inclusion policies, crazy Green New Deal climate scams. It was funding an army of left-wing activists, these NGOs, non-governmental organizations. They get billions and billions of dollars, and they use that money to then infiltrate corporate America. Resettle, for example, at taxpayer expense, millions of illegal aliens into this country. This mammoth left-wing power structure, plus left-wing media, wasn't organic. It wasn't created naturally. It was funded by taxpayer dollars. And that is why they are screaming and screeching so loud now, is because President Trump is cutting off the slush fund to the organizations that hate and hurt America.
And that's the biggest point there, Kosha. These movements were not organic. It was funded by taxpayers, unwitting taxpayers.
Yes, it has been an illuminating couple of weeks, to say the least. You know, we've always known that the U.S. is running $33 trillion deficits. They have this ridiculous $7 billion and $1 trillion annual budget that they can never seem to cut or shrink government spending. Now we know that beyond the spending, it is also these sort of insidious, nefarious actions that have created this whole infrastructure, as Stephen Miller said, of NGOs, who, by the way, the proprietors of these NGOs enrich themselves along the way. They take massive salaries. You can look all of this up when you combine 1099s with USAID. And then on top of that, they sort of astroturf, which is effectively what he was saying, these issues domestically and internationally. And it's really illuminating that the groundswell of support that maybe people thought we were battling with left-wing ideology, climate and DEI and all the rest of it, is actually not really there. There's no grassroots support for it, but it is top-down by definition, funded by USAID and even other organizations that now Trump is beginning to look into.
Incredible amounts of chutzpah here, using taxpayers' money to come up with policies and laws, agendas that most people actually do not support, and doing it in this underhanded manner. There's been very little transparency up until now. Now, Politico, they're supposed to be an independent news organisation, but they pump out a constant stream of anti-Trump propaganda. They received $8.2 million in US dollars, 8.2 million US in government funding. And that increased significantly in 2020 when Joe Biden became president. How are they justifying this, Kosha? Because they're not a public broadcaster, they're not PBS or NPR, and there's talk that their funding should be cut as well.
Yes, the public broadcasters, that's been a long-standing debate around the world. Why do taxpayers fund media for political news? By definition, should be objective. And now this is, again, insidious, where these are for-profit corporations. It's a little bit from USAID, but a lot of it is just straight-up subscriptions to their enterprise plan. Political Pro is the name of the plan, and it's something like $8,000 to $11,000 a subscription. And it's just running rampant, where there's multiple subscriptions across different agencies like the Department of Interior or HHS or others that are subscribing to this data. And I would add that those same people in their private lives, I would not be surprised if they share Netflix passwords with each other, but here they're subscribing to multiple five-figure subscription deals, which adds up to the tune of $8 billion for, again, an organization that has a very clear political agenda. Trump shut that off, and many others like Politico, which is fascinating to see the amount of impact he's having in just a couple of short weeks.
Oh, it's hard to keep up with the pace. This is one of the consequences of just implementing a raft of election promises, is that it can be quite difficult to keep up with everything that's happening. Let's turn our attention to tariffs on Australian steel and aluminium. The Prime Minister has had a conversation with President Trump. This is what Anthony Albanese had to say earlier today.
So it was a very constructive and warm discussion. Again, with President Trump, the US President agreed that an exemption was under consideration.
And when President Trump was asked about the conversation in the Oval Office, this is what he had to say.
I just spoke to him, very fine man, and he has a surplus. I mean, we have a surplus with Australia, one of the few. And the reason is they buy a lot of airplanes. They are rather far away and they need lots of airplanes. And we actually have a surplus. It's one of the only countries which we do, and I told him that that's something that we will give great consideration to.
This is the most conciliatory the president has been when it comes to these executive orders. Do you see President Trump bending on this, given the unique set of circumstances, the close relationship with Australia, and the fact that the US enjoys a trade surplus with us?
Yes, I wouldn't dare profess to know what President Trump would do on any given day, but those 3 points that you mentioned, Rita, are very unique to Australia. As he mentioned, Australia is one of the only countries that the US runs a trade surplus with and has since the mid-20th century. So that definitely is music to Trump's ears, because the whole premise or philosophy, which we do understand about Trump, he's been very clear about it, is leveling the playing field and having reciprocal trade deals where we're not running deficits with every single country. So Australia definitely ticks that box. There is also the defense relationship, where they're big buyers of US aircraft and military equipment and the things in the AUKUS deal. And also the geographic positioning of Australia as a long-standing 100-year ally in this region, proximity to China, all of that just really positions Australia very uniquely. So I would take Trump at his word that he's going to take all of that under consideration and look at the big picture.
Now, some interesting comments from opposition leader Peter Dutton. He actually took a very strong line against President Trump, saying that if he goes through with these tariffs, it's going to put a strain on the relationship between the two countries. Did that take you by surprise that he would interject in such a strong manner in this debate?
It is interesting, the specifics of that, but I sort of see echoes of it with Mr. Pierre in Canada as well, who's Canada's in an election year, and same thing, where they're sort of maybe trying to create some daylight between the other side and themselves, or show that they're sort of strong and they will stand up to anybody, even the leader of the free world. So maybe that's the extent, if I had to wager a guess, of where Mr. Dutton was going. But I think everybody understands, whether it's Australia or Canada, the leverage is very clear who holds more leverage in that situation. And so it's better off for smaller countries that are allied with the US to work within this framework and this America First worldview that Trump has, as opposed to straight up posturing against it, because I just don't think that other countries are going to get very far with Trump's agenda the way it is.
Absolutely. And I do wonder whether Peter Dutton is worried about the left's attacks against him in this country, where so much of the media coverage is vehemently anti-Trump, and they're likening him to Trump on a fairly regular basis, saying he's Australia's Trump, he wants to implement the Trump agenda. And I wonder whether that's something that is causing some worries within the Liberals. It shouldn't. They should be able to counter it fairly effectively. But as we know, sometimes they get spooked, Kosha.
Yes, they do. And that's a playbook from the left now, to try and liken everybody to Trump. But I really hope that they don't fall in that trap. Don't fall into the frame that the other side sets. Just lead on your own merits and maybe agree and amplify. There's much actually about Trump that they could harness and use that to their advantage about, yes, we are pro-Australia. We believe in Australia first. That might be a better strategy if I were advising people on the right side of the aisle in other countries.
Absolutely. I mean, we've seen it happen with Javier Milei in Argentina. He was called the Argentinian Trump. They've done it with Giorgia Meloni, called her the female Trump. And they're two of the most popular leaders anywhere in the world. So there are ways to counter this, and it can actually be used to your advantage. Now, let's talk about conservative activist Robbie Starbuck. He's been incredibly successful in lobbying big corporations like Walmart, Ford, Harley-Davidson, McDonald's to get rid of their DEI policies. This is even before Donald Trump was elected to his second term. And he's announced his next target is JP Morgan, the largest bank in America. Kosha, we are seeing this massive cultural shift in the corporate sector, and the banking industry, well, they're not going to be immune from it, are they?
They certainly will not. There's a few things happening where the US government is now leading by example in these 2 weeks. Every DEI department across the government, DEI contracts with third parties and all of that have been slashed. So that sort of provides political and cultural cover, I think, to corporate America, where maybe even if they believed in it, they didn't want to cut it or walk away from it before, because a mob would come after them. The second thing is, it actually is illegal. The Civil Rights Act specifically and explicitly says that you are not to discriminate labor relationships and employment contracts on the basis of any of these immutable characteristics. And so I think they would expect that the Trump Civil Rights Department and the DOJ under Pam Bondi might even go after certain violations of that in the corporate sector. And Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan, is a very smart guy. I'm sure he understands all of that. And I think Starbuck might just give him the push that he needs. But even without that, the tide certainly seems to be turning.
Kosha Gator, thank you so much for your time tonight. Joining me now is Newsweek's Senior Editor-at-Large and Article 3 Project Senior Counsel Josh Hammer. Josh, we will cover President Trump's comments about the Gaza hostages shortly, but let's start with the furious pace the administration is setting. In just over 3 weeks, they appear to have achieved more than some administrations do over 4 years. And what has shocked many, including the New York Times, is the ease which it's all been done, the ease with which so many in the public and private sectors have fallen into line in abandoning critical race theory and DEI practices. Has it surprised you just how effective Trump has been in these first 3 weeks?
You know, Rita, at some point over the past couple of years, I think something clicked for Donald Trump. I mean, he was always an outside the box thinker. He was always someone who was in there to drain the swamp there. But, you know, maybe it was when Joe Biden and Merrick Garland and Jack Smith were trying to incarcerate him and bankrupt him and generally ruin his life. Maybe it was around the time that Thomas Matthew Crooks came within millimeters of assassinating him in Butler, Pennsylvania last July. But something clicked in this man. And he decided to come out absolutely blistering here in these opening few weeks. It kind of reminds me of something that Steve Bannon said back during the first Trump administration, which is that the mentality should be to flood the zone, to basically do a lot in such rapid succession to try to put the enemy, in this case, that would be the left and the media here in America, to put them on their heels so that their head is constantly on a swivel. They quite literally can't keep up with everything going on right there. And that, I think, basically has been the mentality. Now, we're starting to see some left-wing judges, some lower court judges that are starting to put on some constitutionally dubious nationwide injunctions. So they're basically resorting to the one tool that they possibly can, which are these forum shop judges to try to put a stop in this agenda. But so far, you're entirely right. What we have seen in these opening 3 weeks is the most impactful start to a presidential administration, not just in my lifetime, but I suspect in the lifetime probably of anyone who is still alive here in the United States today. It has been remarkable to see, and I hope it keeps up, frankly.
Now, the USAID fight is one that signifies the divide between the activist left, who've wielded just enormous power, disproportionate power, and pretty much the rest of the country. We'll get to how USAID was complicit in creating the false narratives behind Trump's impeachment. But first, the Vatican just overnight took aim at the Trump administration. A cardinal closely aligned to Pope Francis urged the administration to remember Christian principles about caring for others, while a Vatican charity put out a statement claiming that millions of people could die as a result of the, and I quote here, ruthless US decision to recklessly stop USAID funding. Josh, how is stopping funding for the following, and I'm going to just list some items here, going to kill millions? We've got taxpayers' money, 45 million of it going to DEI scholarships in Burma, 7.9 million to teach Sri Lankan journalists how to avoid binary gendered language, 4.5 million to combat disinformation in Kazakhstan, 2 million for sex changes and LGBT activism in Guatemala, 2.1 million to help the BBC value the diversity of Libyan society, 10 million worth of USAID funded meals went to Al-Qaeda, a terrorist group, or it went to a Al-Qaeda linked terrorist group, 5 million to EcoHealth Alliance, one of the key NGOs funding bat virus research in that Wuhan lab. We've got money going to Armenian LGBT groups, money going to LGBT advocacy in Jamaica, 2 million to promote LGBT equity in Latin America, 5.5 million for LGBT activism in Uganda. There's a theme emerging there, Josh.
Yeah, Rita, I give you a lot of credit for reading through that entire list and somehow not just bursting out into laughter, because that would have been my temptation if I were in your position there. Unfortunately, the one who is not laughing is the American taxpayer, who has been subsidizing all of this stupid crap for the better part of 6+ decades. I mean, John F. Kennedy established USAID via executive order in 1961 as a tool of soft power diplomacy at the height of the Cold War. This was the era of the Cuban Missile Crisis and mutually assured destruction there. It was one tool in the American arsenal to try to stop the expansion, the metastasis of the Soviet Union. But the Soviet Union has not existed literally in my lifetime here. And at this point, USAID has been so wildly co-opted by far left gender ideologues and racial identitarians there. Who does the Vatican think they are, frankly, to get on their moral high horse and try to tell us what we can and cannot trim out of our federal budget? They have no right whatsoever to meddle in our own internal affairs when it comes to how we manage our budget here. And for their purposes, they're probably most concerned, if I'm being very charitable, I would imagine they're most concerned about some of the actual rarer good things that USAID does when it comes to, for instance, stopping the spread of Ebola and HIV and AIDS in Africa there. But the point, Rita, that will continue. It will just get subsumed into the U.S. State Department. This is really just bureaucratic streamlining, and it all redounds to the benefit of the U.S. taxpayer. The Vatican has no business whatsoever freaking ever meddling in our affairs. I would kindly suggest, actually, that they get their own house in order, stop putting baby Jesus in a bunch of Palestinian kafiyas. That might give them a little bit more of a moral high ground here to tell us whether or not we can stop subsidizing al-Qaeda militants, as we just saw on screen.
And the hypocrisy there as well. Whenever they're weighing on these issues, you look at how the Vatican itself operates, the security, the walls, the wealth, and perhaps keep those lectures to yourself. Now, tell me about the manner in which USAID was involved in the impeachment of Donald Trump in 2019. Investigative journalist Michael Schellenberger has done some remarkable work uncovering the links here. Tell my audience what the involvement of USAID and that CIA analyst was in the Trump impeachment.
So the 2019 Trump impeachment, it's hard to keep track of all this. I mean, we've had all these prosecutions, and then the second impeachment was a January 6th impeachment that really stole a lot of the headlines. But the 2019 impeachment was the one that involved this fairly brief phone call with Vladimir Zelensky. Trump famously described that as a perfect phone call. It was a fairly brief phone call. If you printed out a transcript there, it was roughly 5 or 6 pages long. The entire country of Ukraine, Rita, in the aftermath of the Maidan Revolution in 2014, became something of a playground for Western NGOs, for Western liberal Hillary Clinton, George Soros adjacent non-governmental organizations there. And, you know, in the aftermath of the Cold War, I was kind of just explaining how USAID lost its reason for existing after the Cold War. It got totally co-opted by this constellation of left-wing NGOs. And a lot of those NGOs were involved there on the ground in Ukraine, ultimately leading to the bogus impeachment of Donald Trump for this Zelensky phone call in 2019. By the way, it's worth remembering that actual impeachment in response to this phone call, what Donald Trump was doing was he was threatening to withhold aid to Ukraine to make sure that they got their investigation in order of Hunter Biden and Burisma. So fast forward actually 6 years later, and we've seen a lot more details, by the way, about Hunter Biden and Burisma, thanks to the Miranda Devine laptop from hell, the New York Post, that whole story there. It turns out that Donald Trump was actually totally correct in 2019 to try to limit foreign aid to Ukraine in response to their shenanigans with respect to Hunter Biden.
Now, President Trump has made it clear that his patience with Hamas is running out after they released 3 hostages who'd obviously suffered terrible abuse, been starved. Here is what the president had to say about that.
When I see that scene that I saw today with people coming out of helicopters and airplanes that are emaciated, that look like they haven't had a meal in a month, there's no reason for that, and I don't know how much longer we can take it.
Do you mean you want to recast?
I don't know how long we can take it. When I watch people that were healthy people a reasonably short number of years ago, and you look at them today, they look like they've aged 25 years. They literally look like the old pictures of Holocaust survivors. The same thing. I mean, the same thing. And I don't know how long we're going to take that.
Powerful words there. And earlier today, President Trump gave Hamas a deadline to release all the hostages or the ceasefire would end.
As far as I'm concerned, if all of the hostages aren't returned by Saturday at 12 o'clock, I think it's an appropriate time. I would say cancel it and all bets are off and let hell break out. I'd say they ought to be returned by 12 o'clock on Saturday, and if they're not returned, all of them, not in drips and drabs.
Josh, how do you see this progressing? Is the ceasefire in danger of coming to an end on Saturday?
Well, it seems like the answer to that question, Rita, is yes, unless Hamas somehow produces all of the remaining hostages, which, if I know anything about Hamas whatsoever, I am quite skeptical that they are going to abide by Donald Trump's demands here. What is that going to mean in concrete terms? I mean, that's kind of the million-dollar question that I have after seeing that clip. I'm not entirely sure that Donald Trump is threatening direct military action in Gaza there. Rather, I think that he would simply be encouraging Israel and the IDF to basically to go in and to double down on their efforts. You know, it's worth recalling, Rita, that the IDF, which, by the way, has achieved the most moral and just civilian to combatant death ratio in the history of urban warfare. But one of the reasons that they have been hamstringing their own soldiers so much when it comes to the rules of engagement was back during the Biden administration, which was constantly threatening them and accusing them of possibly committing genocide or things like this there. But if Donald Trump is saying, you know, all hell is going to break loose, do what you have to do, you're going to get a more unrestrained, a less restrained Israel Defense Forces. That really ought to be very bad news for Hamas at this point there. It seems like Donald Trump has really taken these absolutely appalling Auschwitz-esque images of these freed hostages to heart there. And good for him. Frankly, it seems like Netanyahu's trip to D.C. last week really paid off in spades.
And it wasn't just the condition of the hostages, Josh, it was the psychological torture they were subjected to. One of the hostages, Eli Sharabi, was asked what he was looking forward to, that sham crazy scenes that Hamas had created where they're interviewing them, making them hold up certificates. And he said he was looking forward to seeing his family, his wife and daughters. He didn't know, Josh, that Hamas had already murdered them. That just shows you the depravity and the cruelty of this terror group. It's just beyond human comprehension. It's beyond decency. Let's end on a lighter note. Before I let you go, I saw you had some strong thoughts on the Super Bowl halftime show. It's been widely panned, labelled the worst halftime show ever. Tell me why it left you feeling less than satisfied.
Well, it was a really lousy game. Unfortunately, the Eagles absolutely destroyed the Chiefs. It was a very lousy football game here, and it was an even lousier halftime show. So New Orleans, Louisiana is a very special place, Rita. So I clerked on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit, which is the federal appeals court that has Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi. The court is actually based in New Orleans. My brother actually went to university at Tulane University in New Orleans. I've been to Mardi Gras. I've been to Jazz Fest. I've spent a lot of time in New Orleans over the years. That city, more than arguably any other city in America, which is where the Super Bowl was held, has an extraordinary musical heritage. It is the birthplace of jazz. It has given this country so much when it comes to music there. And then during the Super Bowl that is there in New Orleans, we get this. I mean, was that music? I mean, not to sound like too much of an old crotchety country music fan, which I basically am there. I mean, if that is music, then my definition of music has to meet a whole new barometer. By the way, it would also seem like it was something of an implicit middle finger to white America. Roger Goodell, the commissioner of the NFL, just doubled down hard on DEI this past week, even after Donald Trump got back into office. I don't think I saw a single white person on stage in the entirety of the halftime show. I think that's an unmistakable message that the NFL is sending, frankly, to a large part of their fan base. It was total garbage. And frankly, Rita, I want to see Jason Aldean or Carrie Underwood or some MAGA-friendly country music star at the Super Bowl next year if it's not too late.
Country music at the Super Bowl halftime show, that would be amazing. Can you just imagine 100,000 people singing along? And that was what really stood out to me. When you look at some of those crowd shots, the crowd wasn't into it. People were on their phones. It was only 14 minutes, I think, that performance. And if you haven't even got the crowd there in the stadium having a look at what you're doing, then you can just imagine what people at home were thinking. Josh Hammer, thanks for your time tonight.
Thank you, Rita. Appreciate it.